Most people spend their entire lives believing they failed because they weren't disciplined enough, confident enough, talented enough. But what if the exhaustion you feel isn't personal? What if the strange emptiness that follows achievement, the anxiety that appears even after doing everything right, is not a flaw inside you, but evidence of a deeper design? Because the system was never built to make you powerful. It was built to make you predictable. Easy to measure. Easy to compare. Easy to replace. And if you've ever felt like no matter how hard you work, something invisible keeps you trapped in cycles of pressure, self-doubt, and emotional fatigue, then this is not just another motivational idea. It may be the first honest explanation you've heard in years. From childhood, most people are trained to disconnect from themselves long before they even understand who they are. You are rewarded for obedience before self-awareness. Praised for fitting in before discovering what you actually believe. You learn very quickly that approval is safer than authenticity. And slowly, almost invisibly, a split begins inside the personality. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But most people never get the chance. Because the system benefits from fragmentation. A person disconnected from themselves is easier to influence. They consume more. Fear more. Compare more. Obey more. The modern world does not openly demand your soul. It simply distracts you until you forget you have one. And the frightening part is this. Most people never realize it happened. They think anxiety is normal. They think exhaustion is adulthood. They think emotional numbness is maturity. But beneath all of it is something far deeper, the quiet grief of abandoning oneself. You can see it everywhere. People chasing careers they secretly hate because status feels safer than truth. People performing confidence online while privately feeling invisible. People surrounded by others, yet internally isolated because no one actually knows who they are beneath the performance. Modern society teaches people to build identities the same way corporations build brands. Marketable. Pleasant. Efficient. But not real. And eventually the mask becomes so heavy that people forget where it ends and they begin. This is why so many feel strangely empty after reaching goals they once thought would save them. Because the soul does not measure success the way society does. The soul measures truth. And deep down, many already know they are living too far away from themselves. There's a moment that happens to almost everyone eventually. Usually late at night. The world becomes quiet for a few minutes. No notifications. No noise. No distractions. And suddenly, beneath all the movement, a question appears. What if I've been living someone else's life? That question terrifies people. Because once you see the performance, you cannot completely unsee it. You begin noticing how deeply fear controls human behavior. Fear of rejection. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of becoming nobody. So people adapt themselves endlessly just to remain acceptable. But Jung believed that whatever is rejected internally does not disappear. It becomes shadow. The shadow is not just anger or darkness. Sometimes the shadow is your intelligence you learn to hide. Your ambition. Your sensitivity. Your voice. The parts of yourself the world taught you were too much or not useful enough. And over time, suppressing these parts creates a quiet inner resentment. Not only toward society, but toward yourself. This is why many people feel exhausted around others. Not because interaction is difficult, but because performance is exhausting. The constant editing of personality drains the nervous system. Pretending to agree. Pretending not to care. Pretending to be less affected than you really are. And eventually, the body begins carrying the burden of a personality that no longer feels real. Viktor Frankl wrote, "When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure." And modern culture has perfected distraction. Infinite entertainment. Infinite comparison. Infinite stimulation. But very little reflection. Because reflection creates awareness. And awareness threatens systems built on unconscious behavior. A person who deeply understands themselves becomes difficult to manipulate. That is why genuine self-awareness often feels lonely at first. You begin pulling away from shallow validation. Conversations start feeling performative. Crowds become emotionally tiring. You stop craving attention the way you once did because you begin seeing how fragile most approval actually is. And this is where the real transformation begins. Not in becoming better than others, but in becoming less dependent on them for your identity. The first shift is recognizing that external validation is a psychological addiction. Most people do not pursue goals because they truly desire them. They pursue emotional permission. They want evidence that they matter. That they are worthy. That they are enough. But the more your self-worth depends on outside approval, the more powerless you become. Because your emotional stability now belongs to the reactions of strangers. A compliment lifts you. Silence destroys you. Rejection defines you. And slowly, your entire identity becomes outsourced. This is why emotionally powerful people often appear calm. Not because they feel nothing, but because they no longer negotiate their value with the world every day. There is a certain kind of freedom that emerges when you stop trying to convince people of your worth. You speak differently. Move differently. Even your silence changes. People sense it immediately. Because neediness has a frequency. And so does inner stability. Nietzsche once wrote, "No price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself." But ownership of the self requires something difficult. The willingness to disappoint people. Not cruelly. Not arrogantly. But honestly. Many people spend decades shaping themselves around expectations they never consciously chose. Parents. Culture. Status. Fear. And eventually they wake up feeling like strangers inside their own lives. The second shift is confronting the shadow. This is where most people retreat. Because seeing yourself clearly is painful. You begin realizing how often you betrayed your instincts just to avoid rejection. How many times you silenced yourself to remain liked. How often you abandoned authenticity for belonging. And for a while, this realization hurts. Accepts his loneliness becomes less desperate for validation. A woman who accepts her depth becomes less willing to shrink herself for comfort. And slowly, something powerful happens. You stop begging life to confirm your value. You begin embodying it quietly. There's a scene many people know intimately. You're sitting in a group conversation. Everyone is laughing. Talking over each other. Performing confidence. And suddenly you realize how little of it feels genuine. You look around and sense that most people are terrified of silence because silence forces confrontation with the self. So they stay busy. Constantly stimulated. Constantly distracted. But transformation often begins in silence. Not the peaceful kind. The uncomfortable kind. The kind where you sit alone with your thoughts and realize you cannot keep abandoning yourself. This is the third shift. Withdrawing energy from performance. This does not mean becoming antisocial. It means becoming real. You stop there is grief in awakening. Grief for lost years. Lost identities. Lost versions of yourself that never fully emerged. But this confrontation is necessary. Because the shadow only controls what remains unconscious. The moment you begin facing your fear honestly, it starts losing authority over you. A man who king just to fill space. Stop chasing attention from emotionally unavailable people. Stop explaining yourself endlessly to those committed to misunderstanding you. And paradoxically, this is often when presence becomes magnetic. Because real confidence is not aggressive. It does not demand recognition. It does not force itself into every room. Real confidence is groundedness. A calm relationship with oneself. Jung understood something modern culture still struggles to accept. Wholeness is more important than perfection. The goal is not becoming flawless. The goal is integration. To stop dividing yourself into acceptable and unacceptable parts. To become psychologically whole. And people can feel this immediately. Someone who has faced themselves deeply carries a different energy. Less reactive. Less performative. More present. Their attention feels rare because it is not desperate. Their silence feels intentional because it is not empty. This is why the most powerful people are often not the loudest people in the room. They no longer need constant evidence of their importance. By this stage, something strange begins happening. You stop admiring people simply because society labels them successful. You start asking different questions. Are they free? Are they real? Do they know who they are beneath achievement? Because many people build impressive lives around empty identities. And eventually the performance collapses. No amount of status can permanently protect a fragmented self. This is the existential truth most people avoid until much later in life. You can survive while abandoning yourself. But you cannot feel deeply alive that way. And perhaps that is the real tragedy of modern existence. Not suffering. Not failure. But living an entire life without ever fully becoming yourself. There's another quiet moment that often arrives unexpectedly. You're alone. Maybe driving home at night. Maybe staring at the ceiling after everyone else is asleep. And suddenly you realize how temporary everything is. The approval. The competition. The status games. One day, all of it disappears. And in that realization, something becomes very clear. You were never meant to spend your life proving your worth to people equally lost in proving theirs. Mortality clarifies things. It exposes how much energy humans waste performing identities they do not even truly believe in. And strangely, this realization is liberating. Because once you understand life is finite, authenticity stops feeling selfish. It starts feeling necessary. The final shift is no longer asking the system for permission to exist authentically. You stop waiting for consensus before becoming yourself. You stop treating your instincts like inconveniences. You stop apologizing for depth in a shallow culture. And slowly, you reclaim something the world tried very hard to condition out of you. Inner authority. Not arrogance. Not superiority. Inner authority is quieter than that. It is the ability to stand inside yourself without constant external confirmation. To trust your perception. To remain grounded even when misunderstood. To choose truth over approval. And ironically, this is often the moment life begins changing externally too. Because when people stop radiating desperation, they become difficult to ignore. Not because they are trying harder. But because they are finally aligned. There is a difference between chasing attention and carrying presence. Between performing confidence and embodying self-respect. Between seeking power and no longer needing domination to feel significant. Most people spend years trying to become attractive to the world. Few spend time becoming real. But reality has gravity. Truth has gravity. And eventually, those who stop performing begin standing out naturally in a world addicted to imitation. The system was never designed for you to win in the deepest sense. It was designed to keep you consuming, comparing, obeying, and doubting yourself just enough to remain controllable. But there is something the system cannot fully control. A person who has consciously met themselves. A person who has integrated their shadow. A person who no longer abandons their identity for approval. That kind of person moves differently through life. Calmer. Clearer. Less afraid. Not because life became easier, but because they finally stopped fighting themselves. And maybe that is the hidden truth most people spend decades searching for. You do not become powerful by forcing the world to recognize you. You become powerful the moment you no longer need to betray yourself just to belong inside it. You don't chase. You become. You don't force. You embody. And if somewhere inside this video you recognized a part of yourself that has been silent for too long, hold on to it. Because that quiet voice may be the most honest thing left in your life. And if this message found you at the right moment, subscribe, and share it with someone else quietly waking up from the performance.